All right, I guess we're live, right?
If you say we're live. There is a thing in the corner saying live on my
You,
computer, so I would
sometimes
assume
I
so.
find it hard to trust technology. I'm like questioning
Mm.
myself, is it actually live? But hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. Where Chris says it's evening. So, whatever part of the world you are in, just good morning, afternoon, evening, just add that part to it from our side. It's been such a long time since I did this live with Chris, and I just wanted to start like 5 minutes earlier just to catch up on where we are with Underdogs. But more so, um, hey, Steph, more so, I was kind of feeling a bit nostalgic. Chris, do you remember how we met or got to know each other the first time?
The first time I remember us talking was when you became a Patreon supporter of mine.
Oh, I have been trying to remember, like, how did I meet Chris for the first time? I remember following Autistic Not Weird. Now I remember that. And I remember reading something that I strongly resonated with, and I went down that rabbit hole of researching who you are and what you do. And then I remember signing up as a patron. But what I remember most of all, and what I appreciate most of all, is that usually when you kind of like follow someone and become a patron, um, it's a different story. Like it's more transactional or professional. And with you, we've developed like this friendship and bringing underdogs to kind theory and just doing these sessions. Like the fact that we're ending tooth and nail today, it's kind of making me feel emotional already.
It's making me feel a bit emotional, and
Right.
that's
What,
me
what's what
keeping everything spoiler free as well. But I'm trying to say as little as possible.
what's new? Like what's next in your life these days? I know it's been a long time, and Aisha and Aman have been doing this with you.
Okay.
But what have you been up to lately?
Um, a lot of speaking, a lot of mentoring, a lot of general work with Autistic Not Weird. Um, Writing a new novel. Well, maybe a novel series right now. I'm just focusing on book one, and um, it's taken me a long time to write. But at the same time, it's interesting because the last time I wrote successfully completed a new novel was Underdogs Uprising, like the final Underdogs book, and so I finished the first draft of that in 2020, and it was published. Oh, where was it? The start of this year. But this has been a long year. But
It
um,
has.
but yeah, in terms of first draft, even with Uprising, I knew what I was doing because I'd had most of the story planned out in my head for years. This is the first time in quite some time that I've planned something right from the beginning and I'm just making it up as I go along within reason. I do know how it's going to end, but it's the telling of the story along the way. There's a huge difference between writing a first draft and editing a draft that you've already done. And I've done a lot of editing over the last few years, a lot of rewriting over the last few years, but doing something new for the very first time. Actually, wait, no, last time I did that was Alfie Smith the Speedcuber, which is a children's book. But
I've got a quick question for
yeah,
you. So, when you started writing a book, do you know about what the ending is going to be, and has the ending ever changed? Well,
I pretty much know from the beginning where it's going to go, and I'm open to the ending changing, but I've never changed an ending yet.
never. Okay,
Yeah,
never
it
say
doesn't
never.
mean I would never change an ending. It's just I have changed several things in the editing process. Like um, yeah, me and Steph earlier were talking about the character of Gwen Crossland, who I utterly despise. She is one of my favourite villains, but I despise her. But originally, several drafts ago, she didn't even appear in Tooth and Nail. That I'm pretty sure that's back then the Alex storyline just wasn't what it is today. But um, yeah, she was more like a third I won't say anything else, but she has a surprise appearance in Tooth and Nail. But and what is the other thing I was going to say? Yeah, that's it. Uprising, revealing absolutely no details about Uprising at all. It was originally going to be 28 chapters long, just the same as all the books in the Underdog series are 28 chapters, although a couple of them have prologues. Uprising has a prologue and an epilogue, so if you want to be pedantic, it would have been 30. But it turns out there are 30 numbered chapters in addition to the prologue and the epilogue. And the reason for that was this very, very specific thing during a fight scene close to the end, which I felt needed a bit more developing. So I wrote 2 whole new chapters just for that moment in the final fight scene. And believe me, it was worth 2 chapters to add that little detail. So yeah, I'm very open to. Oh yeah, and those two chapters, they didn't exist until I was halfway through the editing process. So yeah, I'm very open to editing as I go along, but I've not yet changed an ending. And the ending to Tooth and Nail has stayed largely the same since the first draft in 2011.
Wow. Okay. It's already been 6 minutes, and I want to start, but this year Kind Theory has been focused on making its presence on a grassroots level here in North Texas. And I don't know, there are a lot of people who have recently joined our social media that are local. And in case they watch this, and in case they don't know about you, which is like there's no chance that they don't know about you, but in case they don't, I want you to tell them just a brief little bit about yourself, and then I will kind of like give one sentence about what I know about you, and then we can go ahead with the grand finale.
Okay. Right. So, yep, I'm an autistic advocate. I used to be a teacher. Funnily enough, today is the 10th anniversary of me leaving mainstream primary school teaching forever. And very glad that I did ultimately, because I went back into autism-specific special education, which frankly was where I probably should have been all along. And then I left teaching forever for the second time a few years ago to do full-time self-employment, autistic not weird, self-advocacy. And I am, these days I do speaking engagements and teach training and mentoring and consultations and things. And I'm also an author of 6 books. Well, technically author of 5 books. I was the editor behind the non-fiction book, which was frankly written by 150 other people. And funny enough, there are at least 2 people watching this right now, 3 including me, who either appear in it or know someone who appears in it. So,
well, I would like to make a tiny correction there. 5 books and counting.
Fair enough. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, maybe Fort Courage will be book number 7 once it's actually written and edited and good enough to be in a publishable state.
Well, if I were to introduce here to my friends, Chris, I would introduce you as the most amazing human inside and out. I remember when we started. I remember. No, I'm going to tell you why, because I remember when I started Kind Theory, we started out with nothing really, just kind of like a focus on our mission, and I started reaching out to people. And some of them refused outrightly to do something without compensation. But I found my tribe with people like you who wanted to openly collaborate and do something neurodiversity affirming for our communities out there. And I love the fact that through your work, we are amplifying what neurodiversity looks like in fiction as well as in real life. And it's just been Like I can't believe we're already at the end of book 2, to be honest. I'm so happy. But yes, so enough talking. I could go on forever and ever and ever.
Okay.
But I want to start. Would it be okay if you could kind of like give a little recap?
Yeah,
Um,
no, a
and
recap from the prologue, actually, just as a kind of countdown to where we are.
yes.
So, uh, the prologue, there were 12 underdogs alive. Rest in peace, Charlie, who died in book 1. And it starts off with Oliver Roth watching a clone getting blown up by this this shield, which seems to detonate metal whilst allowing organic material to pass through. And this is going to be the shield that gets raised over New London. Chapter 1, Kate and Raj, rest his soul, spoilers. Um, they're outside for James, Kate's brother's birthday, and they look at the sky just as there's a big missile attack coming into New London, because it turns out that there are other forces out there who have come to realise that, within a few days, Nicholas Grant's going to become invincible. So they tried a missile attack, which didn't work. Chapter 2, Ewan and Shannon, who seem to be getting closer and closer, go raiding for a GPS device and find out that the test centre and the first place they need to go to is Oakenfold Special School. But on the plus side, at least they get back to Spitfire's Rise and find that McCormick's collapsed. Chapter 3, McCormick explains that he's going to need an operation to remove a cyst in his abdomen that's basically kept him out of combat for a while, other than one mission that he went on around Christmas time. That's this book being set in May, by the way. That's he managed but didn't do particularly well. So Lorraine's going to give him an operation, take out the cyst, and then he'll join them in combat in the second half of the story. Opinions are mixed about that, but generally speaking, just against him. Chapter 4 is largely McCormick setting up for a very unpopular operation. And Chapter 5, all of the surviving Oakenfold students head to Oakenfold and get ready to break in and try and destroy all the technology that's there. Chapter 6 is Kate having a flashback to what Takeover Day looks like inside Oakenfold, and Mark finding someone working for Grant who's still there, and shooting at him and missing. Chapter 7 is where things get a bit chaotic. They kill this guy and the person who was with, and they don't stop the shield from going up, and Raj is on the other side of it. Thankfully, he's able to find some very important information, pass it through the force field, and burns down the library while he's there. But it ends with Raj running through the force field. Chapter 8 starts with Raj dying, and all of them running off, going in different directions. Ewan, Jack, and Gracie, who ultimately split off because Ewan is not in the mood to be around other people. So Ewan's off on his own. Jack and Gracie are on their own. Chapter 9 is a tank chase on the M1, which is the biggest motorway in Britain. And Mark basically blowing up. Well, he doesn't destroy the tank because, well, up until the war in Ukraine, nothing had ever destroyed a Challenger 2 tank before, other than another Challenger 2 tank. But he did manage to kill the clones driving it, which is how you do it. And then chapter 10, one of my favourite chapters in the book, Jack and Gracie fighting 3 Alex clones, because suddenly, out of nowhere, Alex is being cloned. Like, what? And then Ewan arrives at the end, and Jack suddenly starts to think, wait, hold on. Does that mean that Alex's clones know their way to Spitfire's Rise? Chapter 11 is them getting back to Spitfire's Rise. McCormick's completely fine. The operation went well, other than this huge, horrible scar across his abdomen where he was patched up with a soldering iron. But people are questioning Alex and basically wondering if he's a clone. Later tests prove that no, he's not a clone. But he is wondering about certain missing memories. Chapter 12 is a meeting of the big four. and Oliver Roth bringing, I'm so sorry to say this, whoever behind Kind Theory wrote I'm Still Stuck on Raj, because this the chapter that Oliver Roth brings his head to a meeting, basically just to prove a point, and Marshall has a word of him about just losing his self-discipline. You have to remain disciplined at all times, and Oliver Roth is acting like Oliver Roth. Like, oh, don't you have a wife to get back to that you're pretending to love? I'm sure she misses you and is pretending to love you too, because Oliver Roth's just like that. And let's see. Yeah, chapter 13 is... Yes, just want to make sure before I say it. But pretty much everyone leading Spitfire's rise. There's the strike team going to New London for the final showdown. There's Shannon, Lorraine, and with Mark guarding outside going to comms, and everyone else, led by Jack, is trying to find Spitfire's rise Mark II. And chapter 14 is the night before they're going to sneak into this procession that gets them to the Citadel, and it's the most important part of it being McCormick handing the detonator to Kate, reluctantly to Kate, but for some reason, they convince him to, fine, let's give it to Kate, but don't detonate it unless basically like all hope is lost. And there's a Shannon and Lorraine chapter where Lorraine basically shares basically why she thinks the world is so ugly and why she's particularly worried about that night, because she is basically responsible for McCormick being part of it. Chapter 15 is Jack and the others finding a Spitfire's Rise Mark II and just hating it, but everyone else breaking into New London and preparing to meet this guy called Arnold Salter. Remember him? Because chapter 16 is them grabbing his key card, basically forcing him to evacuate. He doesn't get far, gets shot very quickly. And then deciding who's going to go where. Chapter 17, you and Alex fighting off 5 clones at the same time without any one of them firing a bullet, which would be one of my favourite scenes in the... Actually, wait, that's chapter 18 that starts, but chapter 17 is set up. Chapter 18 is the fight, which would be one of my favourite scenes, except it's immediately followed by a phone call between Ian and Marshall, which I think is actually better than the fight scene. That's who reveals to them that, you thought you had until midnight, you've actually got half an hour. Chapter 19 is Kate making sure that that's actually fine, because she kills a sniper clone, uses the sniper to shoot the border points. And is that all that happens? No, that's not all that happens, because Ewan destroys the experiment chamber, and at the end of that chapter finds himself locked in by Oliver Roth. Chapter 20 is a fight between Ewan and Oliver Roth, where Oliver Roth is missing, presumed dead, but, well, we all know he's not dead. But Ewan thinks that he is. Chapter 21 is the Alex chapter, where he discovers exactly where his missing memories went. He was captured and basically tortured, brainwashed by this lady called Gwen Crossland, who but he wakes up his memories and finds out that, so it turns out my clones don't know where we are, so everyone can come back. We can still live in Spitfire's Rise. And then he deliberately makes himself forget at the end what he remembered, because he basically sacrificed his dad in order to keep the location of Spitfire's Rise a secret. And then he just forgets it at the end. It's kind of tragic, really. But chapter 22 is McCormick breaking into the high-priority functional cluster, blowing up the paper archive and the central power generator, but getting himself captured. Chapter 23, we're nearly at the present now, is everyone trying to cope with the fact that McCormick's being captured, but they've worked out he's alive because of the guard detail put around this very specific stairwell. And McCormick, this is the last chapter we read. McCormick and Oliver Roth having a conversation which really kind of touches Oliver Roth in a way, where, this may be the enemy of... the leader of all the enemies we've been trying to kill for the last almost exactly a year, but... McCormick is very aware that he has never had an opportunity to have a proper, decent conversation like this with anyone who he works with. But Roth has now handed him over to Grant, Marshall, and Pierce, and now we're at the present. We are very close to the ending now. Everything they need to destroy has been destroyed, except for the computer in Marshall's office. And the only reason that McCormick wasn't shot on sight by Oliver Roth is because just before Roth could shoot him, he got out his walkie-talkie and said, "By the way, Kate, the code to the detonator is blah, 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 blah," and detonated at 10:30. So, yeah, that's the reason that Oliver Roth didn't shoot him, because, okay, we now need to find out what the hell that was about. So the plan now they've got McCormick to floor B, is they're going to bring him to Marshall's office, and yes, the computer's there, but the man is completely unarmed, and basically they're going to watch to see if he starts to sweat when we approach 10:30. We're going to know we're in the blast radius, and then we'll just evacuate. In the meantime, we're just going to interrogate him for information on where it is. But anyway, as soon as the board points are fixed, the shield's going to go up anyway, so what's the problem?
Doesn't that die, Chris?
Sorry?
Like, does McCormick die?
If I said yes right now, wouldn't that be a bit of a spoiler? Also, if I said no right now, wouldn't that be a spoiler?
Oh my god, no.
Right. So, but remember what McCormick said. The priority isn't him living. The priority is them winning the war, and so that involves surviving the night, which involves doing whatever is necessary. Which
But
you
I
and
hope
Kate,
there's someone left by the end of it all to kind of like enjoy the victory.
yeah, well, you realize if all four of them die and the shield is and the computer marshal's office is destroyed, that's still a result, because the remainer still get to stay alive.
Don't say that.
Would you rather I just went on to the reading bit?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Chapter 24. As he was led through the security door on the stairwell between floor C and B, McCormick wondered how his friends could ever hope to reach the high floors themselves. Even if all their enemies vanished into thin air, the mazy corridors and security provisions would make it virtually impossible. Nonetheless, the others were coming. Ewan, Kate, and Alex would not abandon him, nor would they be able to rescue him. McCormick's biggest hope was that they just didn't get themselves killed. At the top of the stairwell, he was met with an electromagnetically sealed door. It was secured shut. His power cut had not disabled the magnet or made the door slide open like in the movies. "You use fail-secure locking devices?" McCormick asked Pierce at his side. "Not fail-safe?" "What's the difference?" asked Roth. "Fail-safe electromagnetic seals unlock themselves in a power cut. Fail-secure ones don't. You've chosen the dangerous one." "So," spat Pierce, "what happens if you need to evacuate?" "Well, what happens if a feral old man cuts the power?" They value security over their own safety, McCormick thought. That would surprise me if I still had any expectations of these people. Marshall had his gold-coloured keycard ready for the moment the power cuts were sorted, and when the lights flickered on, McCormick sneaked a look at Pierce's watch. 12 minutes past 10. "You didn't think melting the generator would keep us in the dark forever, did you?" asked Pierce. "No." "Well, Grant's a big fan of renewable energy sources. You wouldn't think it, the son of Francis Grant abandoning his family's obsession with fossil fuels. But we had a whole spring's worth of solar power stored in industrial batteries, just waiting to be connected to the main grid." McCormick did not respond. Marshall swiped his keycard and revealed the carpeted corridor that led to his office. Pierce's handgun prodded McCormick in the base of his spine and forced him to tiptoe barefooted into the bright and colourful floor B. One level down from the villains' bedrooms, this was as close as the Citadel got to a relaxed, cultured environment. McCormick had often wondered how Ewan and Charlie had felt inside that officer's sector with its leather sofas, sky blue wallpaper, and fluffy carpets, but it must have paled in comparison to this corridor. He even spotted a recreation room complete with table football and video game consoles, and... Wait, he thought, is that a real Monet painting, seized from the National Gallery in Trafalgar Square? McCormick was dragged into a wide, spacious room that dwarfed any of his university offices. One of Marshall's walls was overloaded with a fancy collection of war photography, as well as a large television screen. The mahogany desk displayed good quality model fighter jets, a photo of his daughters, and another of his wife in a lesser quality frame. Hannah Marshall, if McCormick remembered right. Shannon had told him about some of the people she had known on floor A, and there had been a little less venom in her voice whenever she had talked about Hannah. Perhaps he and Marshall's wife didn't share his nature. Turning around, McCormick could see why the nearest wall was so heavily decorated. The other three were filled from floor to ceiling with the biggest and brightest computer system he had ever laid eyes on. The AME computer was secured against Ian Marshall's own office walls, each panel a foot thick and filled with a storm of circuit boards, LEDs, transistors, capacitors, and other odds and ends that McCormick vaguely remembered from his old electronics classes. The whole three-walled computer seemed to be inside its own huge glass aquarium, filled with a blue liquid that McCormick assumed to be a cooling system. Any computer big enough to power such a feat of technological futurism was bound to need a lot of coolant. And McCormick was embarrassed that the thought hadn't occurred to him before that moment. Behind him, Pierce was laughing. Bet you thought you could just come up here, find Ian's desktop computer, and put a bullet through the hard drive, he sneered. Unfortunately, the computer for the AME shield is rather big, and protected with bullet-resistant glass. The final piece of the puzzle is right here in front of me. We may have done well tonight, but unless this behemoth of a computer is destroyed, we lose. Once Pierce had stopped talking, McCormick could hear faint gurgling sounds, which must have been the coolant liquids in the walls. If Marshall's hearing was as good as his own, the gurgling must have been hell to work with, unless the impact was softened by the music that came from the speakers. It didn't seem like the kind of music that Ian Marshall would enjoy, given how well the rest of his office illustrated his personality. When Marshall spoke, he confirmed McCormick's suspicions. Great, Marshall snarled, as he joined Pierce and Roth in the middle of the room. He's playing Bach, in my office. Nothing wrong with a bit of Bach, came a heavy but lively voice from the entrance behind them. He was the original father of harmony. Beethoven's words, not mine. McCormick had heard the man's voice before, less than an hour earlier on the other side of Roth's radio. He knew the man's identity without needing to turn around. I would have thought Bach was a bit churchy for your taste, McCormick replied. A hand grabbed the bone of McCormick's shoulder and turned him around, and he was met with the formidable sight of the most hated man on earth. Dressed in the smartest of tailor-made suits, with a full head of shoulder-length white hair, the face of McCormick had only seen on television had found its way into real life. The man greeted him with an entertained smile, his body giving off the enthusiastic energy of a televangelist. He clamped McCormick's hand in a vigorous handshake, releasing him moments before cracking his finger bones. My name is Nicholas Grant. Dr. Joseph McCormick. A discomforting smirk settled on Grant's face as he glanced up and down his prisoner's body. His head and shoulders swayed back and forth, as if he were a snake readying himself to strike. After a judgmental shake of his head, his voice rose to a piercing bellow. This is the man I got dressed up to meet, he asked. I waited a full year to make contact with the great Joseph McCormick, the leader of the only rebel faction in Britain, the man who united 32 people on Takeover Day and turned them into a miniature army, the man whose soldiers spent a year burning and sabotaging their way through New London, the man who even convinced my daughter to live among him and his minions, and this is who I end up meeting. An exhausted man in torn clothing, gasping for his final breaths after a simple walk up the stairs, aged in his mid-60s but with a stench of death already buzzing around him. And to top it off, the good doctor happens to be really fat. Wow, he thought. I'm glad he didn't do my best man speech. Grant dipped his head to meet his enemies. McCormick was tall compared to most people he knew, and he hadn't met anyone taller than him in over a year. But Grant stretched towards 7 feet. For the first time since completing his doctorate, McCormick stood before someone who made him feel insignificant, not just in stature, but in authority. This suit cost me £3,000, Grant continued. Back in the days of the good old British pound, of course. Way back from my father's days in charge of his oil company. I haven't worn it since his funeral. Tonight was my chance to take off my shirt and jeans and, well, dress to kill. What a letdown this is. You look like the kind of man who loves a good suit, answered McCormick. Fancy offices for your staff, Bach playing over the speakers. I bet you get suited up daily just to look good in front of your subordinates. The domineering figure spat a laugh. I'm Nicholas bloody Grant. I don't have to impress anyone. McCormick could have smiled, were it not for the terrible truth behind Grant's words. With the exception of Shannon, none of his friends had ever laid eyes on Grant in the flesh. For a year, his friends had waged war against a name, an invisible figure with a larger-than-life reputation, like gravity or oxygen, or perhaps even the work of God. Nobody saw Nicholas Grant in his physical form, but his impact was everywhere. We don't have much in common, Grant continued, but I have to appreciate your drive not to impress people either. Your name will be forgotten the moment your friends are found and destroyed, but that doesn't seem to discourage you. I like that. Oh, don't try finding common ground between us, said McCormick wryly. I'm sure I couldn't possibly measure up to you. What do you mean? Asked Grant with a smile. You mow down your enemies with the same mentality as me. You have only one goal, and anything and anyone is expendable in order to reach it. Isn't that right? You must have known the death sentence you gave to Arnold Salter the moment you took his keycard. Even if you released him to ease the weight on your conscience. And now his young ones will be cast into the inner city. Always happens when a staff member dies. You must have known that too, but you took his keycard anyway. He had 3 kids, and his wife died 2 years ago. His children only had a father to rely on. McCormick dipped his head. I won't let him make me feel guilty. He won't trick me into thinking our side is as morally wrong as his. Tragic, right? Said Grant, seizing McCormick by a clump of his remaining hair and demanding further eye contact. You see yourself as the deliverer of all things good and the saviour of suffering people, but you and your servants tear apart the lives of the innocent just like I do. Leadership. Isn't it lonely? I live my life around friends. I can never be lonely. Not like you. Your friends are dying out, Grant shouted, half laughing. Raj Singh lies dead and decapitated outside his old school. Last month Oliver took away Charlie Coleman. Before that we tortured Daniel Amopoulos to death. Before that we found Rachel Watts' body in the wreckage of a car. And before that, Ben Christie. I get the point! He made me raise my voice. Nicholas Grant is getting to me. Spitfire's rise gets lonelier with every failed mission, Grant whispered into his ear. Your shining stars are flickering out one by one, as if they know their universe is dying. The sky is getting dark, and your house is growing quiet. How long until the last star goes out? The first tear ran down McCormick's cheek, as if it were trying to flee the conversation. Doctor, asked Grant, you do have something to say, right? McCormick wiped his fingers over his face and gasped a sentence. The pain of missing someone is always worth it for the joy of having known them. Always. What the hell is that supposed to mean? It means that even though I miss the friends you killed, I can look back on a year that was far less lonely than yours. McCormick had never taken a punch before. Grant's closed fist struck against his chin, and his head keeled to one side as his brain tried to work out how to balance itself. Grant was yelling something, but no words registered in his mind. When his sight found its way to the door, 2 out of the 3 faces were smiling. The odd one out, curiously, was Oliver Roth. You can hit me all you want, McCormick rasped, but it won't change the facts. My friends and I practically took down your empire tonight. 4 against infinity, and we're winning. And it'll all be for nothing in a matter of seconds. A circuit breaker alert sounded the moment your little girl fired that sniper bullet, and it even indicated where the break came from. Last I heard, my men were about 3 minutes away from replacing the perimeter point you shot. I don't know what you think your bomb's going to do, if it even exists, but it'll go off 10 minutes too late. Perimeter point. Raj was close, calling them border points. Raj. Another shining star that flickered out under my leadership. McCormick felt his body falling to the side, but steadied himself just in time. Nicholas Grant packed a serious punch. The white-haired dictator wandered to Marshall's mahogany desk with a little joy in his step and moved a key from the drawer and unlocked a plastic covering that surrounded a black switch on the giant computer. McCormick's eyes followed Grant's to the digital clock on the wall, which he had not noticed before that moment. It led 10:16:23 p.m., 19th of May, year 1. 13 and a half minutes without breaking. Easy peasy. That's Kate you were talking to over the radio, Grant started. Kate Arrowsmith, if I remember right. How accurate's her watch? Set to Big Ben. Remember that thing? Collateral damage. But it's good to know that our clocks are synchronized. I want to know exactly how long I have to deal with her threat. You and me both. So I have a few questions to ask, Grant continued. Ian, is Gwen nearly here? She tells me she is, Marshall muttered from the entrance. McCormick detected resentment in Marshall's voice. Presumably, he despised his office being occupied by his colleagues. You'll like Gwen Crossland, Grant said to McCormick. She's very persuasive. I didn't spend my last Christmas running around and planting bombs just to give her the game away with 13 minutes to go. We'll let her be the judge of that. And it's not just the bomb I'm interested in. How did you shelter so many people in the depths of England against all my satellites, thermal imaging technology, and random clone searches? More importantly, where the hell are you sheltering? Once my shield's up and we're done with your little weapon, I want some answers to those questions too. McCormick's breath held itself inside his throat. He doesn't know where Spitfire's rise is. Alex didn't give it away after all. But that's not the point here. Grant won't need to go after us once he's raised the shield. He'd be hunting us for revenge, not strategy. Ah, chuckled Grant with a slow nod. Now you're nervous. Which reminds me, Ian. Ian, Nathaniel, how anxious has the good doctor been since his capture? No more than you'd expect, answered Pierce from the back of the room. Actually, his mood's the same as when we first met him on floor F. So if his nerves haven't changed, it's fair to say we haven't walked into the blast radius by coming in here? Pierce shrugged. If it were me, I'd take him on a tour of floor B and watch for a change of expression. Give me a break, McCormick answered with a limp cough. It's late at night and I've done a year's worth of jogging today. I'm tired. Grant smiled. Ian, he said, get on the phone to every section officer in New London and order them to inspect their areas fast. I want the HBFC searched. I want every room the rebels have ever visited to be turned upside down. I want vehicle ports torn apart and every officer's sector gone over inch by inch. Nathaniel, load up some security files and find out which of our rooms were targeted around Christmas time. He flashed a proud pair of shiny blue eyes towards his twitching prisoner. And thanks for giving that part away, you old fool. A phone rang on Marshall's desk. Marshall jogged across his office and answered. Sadly, the conversation didn't take much time. Nick, said Marshall, the perimeter point has been replaced. Nicholas Grant laughed, lifted the plastic cover at his side, and rested his fingers on the black computer switch. Dr. McCormick, he said, it's a beautiful coincidence that you're here to watch my empire become utterly invincible. And all before your secret weapon had any chance to make a difference. Ian, turn on your TV. I want to see a security feed to the outside of the Citadel. It's a shame we'll be indoors for the man-made Northern Lights, but watching my victory on television will have to do. Marshall obeyed and flicked around with his remote control until he found a video feed from the upper battlements. The view stretched across the English countryside, soon to be as isolated from New London as Sydney Opera House. McCormick looked back at Nicholas Grant, just in time to see him flick the switch and activate the AME shield. End of chapter 24.
Cliffhanger again. I'm glad we're doing 5 chapters.
Yep. Now, I actually 29% battery. That should be enough. You know what? Just so it's no longer in my mind, I'm going to run, get the charge for this laptop, and I'll be right back. If anyone has any questions or comments or anything they want to put in the chat, please do. I'll be back in 30 seconds.
All right. Steph, is it the first time you're listening to this or reading this, or have you read it already?
Nicholas Grant's just flipped the switch. Nicholas Grant has just flipped the switch. Yeah, that's me updating my partner on where we currently are.
Oh, she should be a part of the finale.
And she was Underdog's biggest fan before it was even published.
I remember. I wanted to, recall that story when you mentioned about Raj dying. There was something she said to you.
That might have been her nickname that she came up for me during book. That was actually in book 1 when the Lord let Ewan go, but then Nicholas Grant's voice boomed across the Citadel saying, "Yeah, you're not getting
Yes.
food until." Yeah, that's when she called me an utter bastard. So, so UB has been a nickname for me for quite a while. I won't tell you what her name was at any point during this because it may contain spoilers, but there was another nickname after this.
All right, so Steph says she doesn't know what's coming. Okay, so we're both in the same boat then.
Well, without any further ado, chapter 25.
Yes.
McCormick had never been keen on video games, but he had seen the undeserved death face in plenty of children whose characters had unexpectedly got shot or fallen from high platforms. When the flitch was flipped and nothing changed on Marshall's enormous computer, Grant mirrored those children's expressions perfectly. "What the hell do you mean, coordination error?" he screamed, droplets of saliva landing on the offending screen. "I just bloody replaced the perimeter point." Yeah, you just replaced the point. McCormick could not hide a smile. Grant started to pace around the borders of the room, looking for something on his 3-walled computer that could make everything right again. Unsuccessful, he glared at McCormick, his neck and shoulders trembling. McCormick decided to speak before somebody forced him to. "I may be a mathematician," he said, "but I know a thing or two about physics. And it looks like you organise your circuits in series instead of parallel. Maybe you had to, given the nature of the shield and how it depends on every single coordinate working. But it means your perimeter points are like Christmas tree lights. Once the circuit's broken, you can't tell how many are faulty at the same time. I imagine you worked out where I'm going with this." Grant thumped his fist onto Marshall's desk with so much force that he almost sent mahogany splinters into his muscles. "Long story short," McCormick finished, "you don't really think my little girl fought her way to the battlements to shoot one of them, do you? Your field must be littered with dozens of broken perimeter points. Grant had stopped listening. He stomped his way across the carpet to shout at his allies. Ian, he began, the borders are your responsibility. Get every one of those things along the northern wall looked at and replaced. That'll take a good hour or two. I don't give a flying rat's arse. Do it. Marshall rolled his eyes the moment Grant looked away. What's it like being you, Ian Marshall? McCormick thought. Taking orders from a boss who consumed your company and used it to shape world history? How do you feel working for a tyrant who made you build an army and conquer a nation, while he put his feet up and listened to bark? If you're interested, Pierce said to Grant, while you were busy shouting at the computer, I got a message from Adam King. Who? Archives manager. He found where the Christmas time raids were targeted. They were spread all across floor Z. Well, that's helpful, spat Grant, throwing his head upward in disgust. Maybe it's more helpful than you think. He compiled a list of the targeted rooms and mapped them out. Turns out they make an approximately straight line all the way from the outer city walls to the border of the inner city. Grant froze in place and glared at Pierce as if he were the man responsible. Every one of those rooms needs inspecting, Nathaniel. Get people on it now. I've got a bad feeling there are explosives in every single one of them. Really? From one end of the outer city to the other? In a straight line? Engage your bloody brain. He wants to blow a tunnel through the walls for the prisoners to escape. Poker face, poker face. Grant began to laugh, and McCormick tried to turn his head away from his enemies. The dictator barked a tirade of commands. Tirade or tirade? I've never actually known. Sending every clone from floor Z to the stretch of rooms on King's list. McCormick looked at the clock and found 11 minutes remaining. When he looked forward again, Grant was staring into his face. Game over, Grant said with a beaming smile. Either my clones find you explosives and defuse them, or they go off and you create a death tunnel for tens of thousands of escapees to get shot in. A pretty awful plan, if I may say so, but I suppose you can do much better on the lower floors. McCormick sighed. So I guess you have a little time to spare, he said. Do you offer last requests? Not normally, no. But in my case, you're welcome to ask. McCormick looked at Grant's face and used a voice that made his plea sound as gentlemanly as possible. Before I die, I'd like to know what this war is truly about. Grant began to laugh, longer and louder than he had all evening. You think we're opponents in a war? He asked. You're nothing more than civil unrest, an unwelcome brawl, a minor inconvenience from dead men walking. For you, it must look like the biggest war humanity has ever fought. But from my perspective, answer my question. Now, please. Grant smiled, almost entertained by McCormick's attempt at a command. I'm going to miss you, Joseph. May I call you Joseph? It's a shame we'll only ever get this one chance to talk. Then let's make it count. Is this about world domination? Is that your master plan? World domination, Grant repeated with childlike laughter. I dislike that phrase. I don't want to dominate the world. I just want to subdue it. But why? McCormick was not expecting an answer. When Grant gave one, his heart stood still. Simple. To cull the human population. The breath caught in McCormick's throat, and he could not ask for details, but Grant sensed the question. 9 billion people live in this world. This is set in the future. That's about 6 billion too many. Everyone goes on about wanting to save the world, but the world looked after itself just fine before humans came along. If it needs saving, it needs saving from us. McCormick found himself muted. Just when he thought nothing else could surprise him about life on the upper floors, the great Nicholas Grant, son of an oil tycoon, had revealed himself to be an eco-warrior, but not the progressive, philanthropic type, like those who had protested government inaction on climate change before Takeover Day. A rich, powerful, genocidal eco-warrior. Once the power of humans has withered, it will give the planet some time. Rainforests will grow back. Polar ice caps will stop melting. Nature will have its oceans back. And once there are too few humans left to wreck the world again, we'll close down the citadels across the globe, purge the clones, and allow the survivors to rebuild. But that'll be generations from now. I don't suppose I'll live long enough to see the world safe again. What you're suggesting is monstrous, McCormick said as he found his voice again. Monstrous? Consider this, Doctor. The end of every geological era, Triassic, Jurassic, and so on, is marked by a mass extinction. The meteor that killed the dinosaurs was the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event, which killed 3/4 of all animal species. The Permian-Triassic extinction event killed 96% of everything. But those extinctions took place over thousands, maybe millions of years. Grant walked within a meter of McCormick so he could lower his face to finish his point. We're in the middle of a man-made extinction event right now. Up to 10,000 species vanish every year. That's thousands of times higher than the natural rate. And this is just over a couple of hundred years. Just imagine what we do over the course of 1 million. McCormick made the mistake of looking into Grant's eyes and saw his unbridled enthusiasm. He believed every word. And worst of all, he knew that science backed him up. McCormick dipped his eyes away from Grant's stare. At least a dozen people in his life had been part of the climate change protest before takeover day. If they were still alive, they were now being kept in the citadels, due to be killed off by a rich man in the glorious name of saving the world, as if they were the people the world needed saving from. This is the first time in the known history of the Earth, Grant continued, that mass extinction has been caused by one of its own species. If it were any other species, we'd wipe them out and call it saving the world. So tell me, who are the real monsters? McCormick raised his head again. The real monsters, he answered, are those who force whole families into concrete prisons, then collect the bodies of their starved children. At the back of the room, Marshall took the opportunity to interrupt. Radio message, Nick, he said. Kate Arrowsmith got 6 perimeter points. McCormick's broken face lit up just a little. Grant's culling of the human race was not a certainty just yet. 6? How long will it take? An hour, maybe more. Grant gave McCormick his deepest head teacher stare before turning and heading for the exit. Well, sod it then, he shouted. I'm staying in my quarters until the show's ready. Or at least until this bomb scare is sorted. You're not watching the prisoner? Asked Roth. No, we're leaving him with Ian. We? Asked Pierce. Yes, Nathaniel, you're going to your own office. Oliver, you're going downstairs to hunt rebels. Try not to get killed again. Ian, you stay here. And when Gwen Crossland arrives, tell her she's a slow cow. Stay close to your phones, gentlemen. As Nick passed through the exit, McCormick shouted after him. Hey, Nick, he yelled. May I call you Nick? Grant did not turn around. Sorry, he answered. Did I just hear a dead man talking? Probably, but you're forgetting one thing about the human race. And what's that? McCormick gave a proud smile. It's made up of people like Ewan and Kate. Grant abandoned McCormick without another word. With a shrug, Pierce walked out and made his way towards his own office. Marshall stepped further inside. At first, Roth refused to leave. I know what you're thinking, Roth snapped at his boss, and don't be stupid. Grant will string you up if you torture him for information. Why, what would you do? Because I know what I'd do in your position. What's that? Get the hell downstairs like you're being commanded, and clear up the other 3. Now. Roth hesitated, but ultimately obeyed, as Marshall drew out his handgun. Excuse me. As Marshall drew out his handgun. McCormick and Marshall were left alone long enough for a quick glance at the clock, which revealed 8 minutes remaining. Not 1 second later, Gwen Crossland walked into the room. How can I help you, gentlemen? She asked softly. McCormick bit his lip. This tiny, aging woman looked like the opposite of a typical villain, but there was a little something in her facial expression that told him she was a perfect fit on the inside. Nick says you're a slow cow, said Marshall. Crossland gave a discreet smile with the corners of her lips, but no further response. We need your help extracting information from this man, Marshall continued. The location of a mysterious weapon, if I heard right. No, we found that. The soldiers are disarming it as we speak. He has other information we need. The location of his headquarters, said Crossland, adjusting the top button of her cardigan. Well, you won't get that in 8 minutes. I could perhaps get you a precise address by the end of the week. A precise address? Like you managed with Daniel Amopoulos or Alex Ginelli? Daniel, Alex, 2 of my boys. Will I ever know what you did to them? Neither of them had the address we needed to extract, Crossland continued. This man will have a much higher likelihood of knowing. And if your traditional methods fail, call your friend Nathaniel and clone this person. We haven't used the memory transfer technology since Marshall turned to her with a transparent look of surprise. Well, Crossland said, I probably shouldn't talk about it in front of a patient as if he's not in the room. She pursed her lips and turned to face the exit. I'll be in my lower office on floor G, she finished, setting up my equipment. If you could dispatch a team of clones to escort him down to stairwell 32, I'll be happy to meet them there. Floor G, stairwell 32, thought McCormick, far, far away from the luxury of Marshall's office. Right next to the satellite control room, if I've memorized the maps right. The thought filled him with uninhibited dread. When the time comes, should I tell her we'll both be in the blast radius? Before Crossland could leave the room, a string of buzzes sounded on Marshall's radio. He held out a flat hand to stop her in her tracks and brought the radio to his ear. McCormick had not learned the clone's coded language, but a translation became visible on Marshall's horrified face. He turned a shade of maroon, and his quivering gun hand pointed his pistol at McCormick's head. Nothing found on floor Z, he snarled. Nothing. McCormick did not move a muscle, not even in his face, especially not in his face. 6 minutes until past, and the bomb is nowhere to be found. Gwen, better get to work now. Gwen Crossland shook her head. I've told you before, she said with the slow voice of a play school teacher to a 3-year-old. Just like I told Nicholas when we had Ginelli, my work is not fast food. It takes time and precision. I can promise results that are accurate and trustworthy, but I cannot produce them at the speed that you and all the other impatient men want me to. If you have 6 minutes, my methods can't help you with any reliable accuracy. She walked away from Marshall's office, and her faint footsteps didn't take long to leave McCormick's earshot. For the record, McCormick said to Marshall, I don't think 6 minutes is long enough either. You'd be amazed what I can do in 6 minutes, Marshall answered. Gwen can spout whatever crap she wants about her precious methods, but I've got methods of my own. Marshall lowered his handgun just a little and squeezed the trigger. A horrible bang shouted, and the bullet struck McCormick in the shin bone. End of chapter 25. So on the one hand, it's kind of looking good, but it's also very much not. Not least because, oh yeah, thank you. Not least because, well, even if they win the night and survive the war, they still know that it's not just the future of Great Britain at stake, it's the future of the human race.
Hey, Chris, quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Who are your top three favorite autistic authors?
Autistic authors, oh wow. Now I'm trying not to armchair diagnose historical authors. I don't know. Honestly, I haven't read much fiction from autistic authors, so that's a difficult question to answer, to be completely honest. I'm wondering if Mary Shelley was autistic and have read Frankenstein. Very much liked Frankenstein. And I don't know. How many openly autistic fiction authors do you know of?
I haven't read fiction much. I think you're the only autistic author that I've come across.
I'm honored.
But I've read others. I know one of our board members, she has a book called Sincerely Your Autistic Child. Then Eric Garcia has a book, We're Not Broken. There's a lot of authors whom I love, but I think you're the only one who stands out when it comes to fiction.
Oh, thank you.
And by the way, I wrote, what are your now? Who are your my brains?
That's fine.
Oh, God. Okay. Well, I apologize, everyone. My brain's going. Chris has given me so much to process today. So go ahead, Chris.
I'm about to give you a lot more.
Oh, no. All right.
McCormick's just been shot.
I am bracing myself.
Chapter 26. Let me take a moment. "10:25 p.m. Guys, Kate screamed into the radio. Talk to me, where are you? Her eyesight was blurred with tears. The floor D corridors were a mess of unfamiliar sights and the layout was barely navigable. About half a corridor from the stairwell to floor C, came Ewan's voice. If a miracle happens, we can make it. Raj used to believe in miracles. I don't think I ever did. Her whole world was racing through her mind. The thought of her grandfather figure trapped in a mystery location somewhere on the upper floors. Marshall's computer not far above her. Mum and Dad in New London. The possibility of James still being alive. Her dead boyfriend. But more than anything else, the cigar-shaped detonator in her left hand. She had dialed in the code the moment McCormick had revealed it, not trusting her panicked memory to remember it later. His secret weapon had been armed for what had felt like several hours, with the top cover closed to prevent her pressing the button by accident. Kate didn't know what the world would look like once she pressed the button. She only knew that the closer she was to floor B when it happened, the easier it would be to reach Marshall's computer while everyone was distracted. Kate, came Alex's voice. We need a favour. What is it? We found the stairwell to floor C. The security door is humans only, and the keycard we stole has been cancelled already. Kate wiped her face, leaned against the nearest wall and let out a moan. She knew what was coming. If you find a human, kill them and take their keycard. Ewan and I didn't find anybody on the way here. 10:26 p.m. Shannon had not been frightened at first, not until Lorraine had burst into tears. Her cries had been loud enough to hear halfway down the street, but she didn't seem to care. The attic's tiny size amplified the volume as the sounds echoed off the walls. Do you want me to be in charge of the phone? Shannon asked. Not a chance, Lorraine replied. Shannon knew better than to argue. Perhaps Lorraine blamed herself for McCormick's capture, and in all likelihood, his eventual death once Dad was finished with him. Shannon had vivid memories of Daniel Mopoulos' torture, which she had kept to herself. Nobody in Spitfire's Rise needed to know that her father had made a watch, or how it ended for Daniel, and what probably lay in store for McCormick too. Unless, of course, his bomb helped the others rescue him. Lorraine, she said, I don't know what's happening in 4 minutes, but if you're not up to talking, then I have to be. Tell me everything I need to know. Maybe it'll mean we win the battle, but not the war. Or maybe we won't win either. But once it goes off, everything changes. Lorraine lay her head in her cupped hands and rested her elbows on the table to support its weight. I told you about Joey Shetland tonight, she said, the little boy who she used to work with who killed himself at the age of 12, basically her inspiration for becoming a nurse. And my 20 years of trying to make the world less ugly. It was brave of you to tell me. Come to think of it, your whole life's been an act of bravery. Lorraine ignored the compliment. Nursing taught me that sometimes ugliness can't be avoided, and combat has taught me that sometimes you have to cause ugliness to make the world better. Shannon took a moment to remember Keith Tyler, Grant's number 2 assassin, who she had stabbed to death the night she had met the Underdogs. That had been ugly enough, but it had made the world better. But she wasn't sure it was the type of ugliness Lorraine meant. McCormick's bomb will make the world ugly? Asked Shannon. Lorraine nodded, but offered no details. In a few minutes' time, Shannon continued, you'll be explaining the whole thing to Ewan. If it'll make it easier, you can practice with me right now. Lorraine gave Shannon a vicious stare, but turned her seat in her direction. Apparently, she thought it was a good idea. Lorraine, asked Shannon, where did McCormick plant the bomb? 10:27 p.m. The return to Spitfire's Rise should have felt warm and welcome. Instead, Jack felt embarrassed. He had found that replacement Homer at a speed that had impressed everyone, only for everyone to wonder why they'd bothered once Mark had called them up with the good news. Jack laid his box of weapons on the grass before he opened the trapdoor and leapt inside, and did his best not to feel ungrateful. They were back in Spitfire's Rise, a place that had become more of a home to him than any of the houses from his previous life. In fact, his time away from the house had reminded him of exactly how much he had both loved it and depended on it. I did my duty and served the others well, he thought to himself, and ultimately it was all for nothing. Then again, that's what to expect when you live your life for the sake of others, unrewarded servitude. Jack bit his lip and let out the quietest sigh he could. Reward or not, it had still been the right thing to do. And if Spitfire's Rise were ever in danger of being exposed again, he will take the same actions again. His personal preferences had no right to enter into it. But serving others did not mean they would like you. Gracie had been colder to him than frostbite ever since he had told her the truth about not wanting to be with her because he's not attracted to anyone. She and Simon followed him into the tunnel, and Thomas brought up the rear with a small box of food. Once they reached the entrance, Mark was waiting next to the memorial wall. That's everything, is it? He muttered. Yeah, answered Jack. What's that in your hand? Mark lifted up the bottle of wine, and Jack read the label closely. Cremant de something or other Frenchy, he said. You know, you shouldn't be offering that to underage teens, you know. I think we need a bottle. And Mark answered as Simon and Gracie dumped their boxes of weapons, and Thomas carried his food in the direction of the farm. One way or another, we're writing history tonight. Either we lose this war forever and we'll drink to the death of Great Britain, or the guys will return victorious and we'll drink until we believe it. Gracie crept up close and brought her eyes level with the bottle's label. Be careful with that, she said. It looks like strong stuff. It's 750 ml. That's milliliters for those who don't use the metric system. Sorry, America, but also not. Jack opened his mouth to correct her, but shut it again when he remembered that he was her least favourite person in the world. There was an odd sound at the door to the farm, like falling paper. Jack turned around. Thomas had dropped something from underneath his box of food whilst trying to open the tunnel door. At the boy's feet were a bunch of envelopes, the ones Jack had told him to hide under McCormick's mattress and given no second thought to ever since. A look of fright appeared on Thomas's face as the envelopes landed face up. The top one read, Mark. You may remember, like half a year ago, there was one labelled Raj, which McCormick tore up. The young man stormed over, ignoring Thomas's desperate protests, and ripped the envelope open. I promised McCormick. Mark brushed Thomas to one side and started to read. Jack ran over to look. Dear Mark, the paper began. 10:28 p.m. Ewan checked his watch and swore. He and Alex had been trapped in the stairwell to floor C since they had arrived, so near to Marshall's computer, yet so far. The lower door burst open, too fast for either of them to ready their weapons. Thankfully, the intruder was Kate, with a golden keycard in one hand and her detonator in the other. "You found a human, then?" said Alex. "Yeah," said Kate. "I knocked him out." Ewan looked at her face. It reminded him of his own face on Takeover Day, right after he realised he had made his first kill. "Right," said Alex. "Let's get going." "No," said Ewan. "Not for another minute and a half." His friends glared at him as if he'd personally insulted them. "Whatever that detonator does, I'd rather get my breath back now and take floor C by surprise after it goes off." He didn't know whether Kate and Alex agreed with his strategy, but the suggestion of catching their breath was well received. Kate climbed to the top step and sat down in front of the door. She was afraid enough for the detonator to tremble in both hands as she brought it close to her face. Ewan remembered McCormick's sadness when Kate had volunteered for the task. He had never been one to underestimate his soldiers, but he must have had his reasons. There was only one decent thing to do. Ewan climbed to the top of the stairwell and sat down next to her. "Alex," he said, "sit there." Alex rolled his eyes, but knew there was no time to argue. He sat down on Kate's other side as commanded. Between them, Ewan could sense Kate's chaotic breathing through the rising and falling of her ribs. "Kate," he said, "flip it open." Kate took several seconds to do so, partly because of anxiety, striking at the most predictable but least convenient time, and partly because it was difficult to operate her twitching fingers. But she did so, and the metal casing sprung open to reveal a solitary, harmless-looking clear button that would change the face of the war. Ewan stuck out a thumb and aligned it next to Kate's. He glanced at Alex, who got the message and did the same. "When the time comes," said Ewan as their three thumbs lined up, "you won't have to push it alone. None of us should feel alone right now." He had no doubt that Kate would have pushed the button herself either way. She didn't even know how to fail when it came to facing her fears. But this wasn't about whether she would do her duty. The trembling in her hands slowed down, and the breathing steadied. "You guys are the best of friends," she said. Ewan smiled. "United by our differences, guys," he said. "United." 10:29 p.m. McCormick was flat on his back, his shirt dampening in a growing pool of his own blood. But it didn't matter. Despite his blurred vision, he could see the time. 50 seconds. Ian Marshall was no longer recognisable as the war veteran and arms dealer he had once been. He was panicked, and there was nothing more dangerous than a panicked man with a gun. As demonstrated by the second and third bullets Marshall had fired, one into McCormick's shoulder and the other into his left hand. "Tell me," Marshall snarled. "Tell me where you planted it." McCormick swallowed and dared to smile. "In a minute." Marshall did not take the joke well. Grant's head of military was a man without control, utterly clueless about the war-changing event moments away, and McCormick could sense how much it scared him. His fourth bullet struck McCormick in his lower thigh, a few inches above his knee. It hurt twice as much as the others, resting inside a big bunch of nerves. McCormick yelled out, tears streaming down his face. 40 seconds remained. Talking would occupy some time, and perhaps result in fewer bullets. "The bombs are spread across floor Z," McCormick said. "Exactly where Adam King told you." "They are not!" Marshall yelled. "Even you're not stupid enough to have that kind of plan. The explosions will kill more civilians than they'll save. Hundreds around the inner city borders will die. Thousands would crush each other to death inside the corridors. My laser cannons and speed mines would start a massacre, and any survivors would get sniper bullets to the back of their heads as they ran for the electric fences." "Oh," McCormick answered with the friendliest face he could manage. "We'll be sure to cross that idea off the list then." With 20 seconds remaining, Marshall was using up the last of his cool. He pushed a foot down against McCormick's wounded thigh and pointed his handgun straight down. "Tell me the truth," he said, "or I will shoot you at point-blank range in the chest." McCormick raised his hand, the one that had not yet been shot, and twirled a weak finger around the centre of his ribcage. "This is my heart. Let's see how well you can aim." Marshall's aim was perfect. His fifth bullet struck McCormick exactly where he had pointed, and sheared through the muscles of his heart. "Very sorry." McCormick felt like the centre of his chest had been hit by a car. All strength left his body. His torso did not even bother to tremble, and the sensations in his nervous system began to fade. His time on Earth would only last as long as the oxygen in his brain, which his halted bloodstream would not refresh. "This is it. No going back now." A voice echoed in his ears. Marshall, stomping back and forth after his moment of madness, was yelling. "Whatever your plan is," he screamed, with globs of saliva flying from his angry mouth, "it won't do anything. Your war will be lost when the shield goes up, no matter how much of the Citadel you destroy. Don't you get it? However many labs and archives you burn to the ground, the computer around you will still be active. It's the only computer that has any control of the shield, and nobody in your team has ever come within half a mile of it. He's almost right. None of them except me. Even though his brain was running dry, McCormick was astonished by how much information could pass through it. His first wave of memories focused on the final week of his life. He remembered his guilt at the pack of lies he had told his friends outside Oakenfold. No bombs had been planted on his visit before Christmas. He remembered his delight as he had snatched the acid grenades in the HPFC, and how his destruction of the central power generator had allowed him to pass to Floor B with nothing but a physical search. The X-ray machine on Floor D would have cost them the war. He remembered how he had spent a whole night arguing with Lorraine Shepherd about the true nature of his operation. His seizure at Spitfire's rise had looked convincing enough. The cyst had been a convenient excuse for an operation, and one he could provide evidence for. But the only woman capable of operating had hated the idea of sealing their supply of NP8 plastic explosives inside his abdomen. Grant had called him fat the moment he had laid eyes on him. McCormick had hidden the extra weight from his friends under several layers of clothing, and carried the NPN8 inside his body for 3 days like his own destructive baby. Not long ago, the world's most powerful dictator had stood 2 feet away from a belly full of high explosives. The plan had always been to get out alive, and perhaps even reverse the operation. But McCormick was dead the moment Roth found him, and he had been smart enough to know it. He hoped that Kate would one day forgive him for telling her the code and asking her to kill him. McCormick's head fell to the side, but he could no longer feel the carpet against his cheek. When he realised he could no longer read the time on the clock, he said goodbye to the world and closed his eyes. In his last moments of brain activity, he thought of his years in the 3rd Durham Boys Brigade, his holidays to Whitby with his long-gone parents, and the day he started university. He thought of the generation of students who had come and gone over the decades, and his honeymoon in Anglesey. He thought of his escape from depression. He thought of Ewan West, the closest lad he ever had to a son, and the words in the letter that awaited him at Spitfire's rise. He thought of the 39 years he had spent in marriage to Barbara, the 2 years Polly Jones had spent rebuilding him, and the 365 days he had spent with the best friends he had ever had. Ewan, Kate, Lorraine, Thomas, all of you, I loved you so much. And Barbara, thank you, Barbara. Not many rooms away from Joseph McCormick's body, Oliver Roth looked at his screen in disbelief, verging on horror. He had seen and heard every moment of the end of McCormick's life, spying on the CCTV system with the excuse of using it to find the remaining rebels. He brought his hands to his face and clawed against his own skin. After every lesson Marshall had told him about self-control, every lecture about strategic thinking, the same man had finished off McCormick with an impulsive gunshot to the heart. Roth no longer knew what kind of death he had wanted for the old man, but his dream of sticking your head on the spike of an electric fence had faded away during that conversation in the storeroom. One thing was for sure. He was overcome with the feeling that McCormick had deserved better. Ian Marshall was right there on screen, standing over the corpse of his greatest enemy, the furious expression on his face so stern that he must have known how much he had screwed up. Nathaniel Pierce couldn't interrogate a dead body. There'll be no McCormick clone model either, like he had promised, like he had watched Crossland suggest over the CCTV, and no extractable memories that could reveal the location of Spitfire's rise. And on top of that, McCormick's bomb would not be stopped. Roth checked both the clock on his wall and the digital clock on screen, both accurate to within a second of each other. They showed less than 10 seconds until Kate Howard Smith's watch read 10:30. Ian, he muttered to the psychotic idiot on his screen, Grant's going to kill you for this. Marshall wandered to his leather chair, but didn't have time to sit down and collect himself. 10:30 p.m., 19th of May, May Year 1. Somewhere below them all, a button was pressed. The resulting explosion tore apart McCormick's body and everything within 20 meters of it, including Marshall, his entire office, and the final computer that held anything related to the AME shield. Ian Marshall had no time to react or even notice the explosion before he vanished into the fireball. Roth did not see the explosion, just the sudden appearance of static on his screen and a moment's pause before the room shook horribly around him. But it was immediately obvious what had happened. Roth ran towards the exit into the floor B corridor, jaw hung open in shock, as the human staff began to scurry around in panic. Most of the way down the corridor, smoke emerged from Marshall's office. Oliver Roth had never felt so saddened to be right. Given the choice between survival and victory, Joseph McCormick really had chosen victory. End of chapter 26. Yeah. I first wrote that in 2011, and it never gets easier.
I mean, as readers, like, we started Underdogs from like the first part, and we kind of like developed an association with each character, and McCormick was the heart of Underdogs.
He was.
And he, like, it, his death is going to be, and the death of Charlie and Raj as well, is going to be very traumatic for the others. Is there
Yeah, you should
any
say that.
talk of trauma or how they handle their trauma? Or they're just in survival mode?
Yeah. One big theme about Acceleration, Book 3, is grief and how to deal with loss and things. And yes, a big part of it is based on how they just won the night. Not it feels like it, but yeah. Anything else to say before we reach chapter 27?
I don't know what's going to happen like without McCormick. Is there going to be?
Well, the action part of it's over. Now it's just the winding down for 2 chapters. But here we go. Chapter 27. For the first few moments after they pressed the button, Ewan heard nothing. Just as he began to wonder whether the detonator had worked at all, the shockwave hit the stairwell and threw all 3 of them off the top step. Ewan landed halfway down, bashing his ribs against the stairs. He cursed in pain, but was distracted by a sudden realization. That explosion came from above. Did anyone else feel... Yeah, said Alex, pulling himself up using the banister. That came from one of the upper floors. Ewan hauled himself upright and reached his uncoordinated hands in the direction of his pockets. Give me 1 second. I'm phoning comms. Give me a second. I'm phoning comms. Now, asked Alex, why not stick with the plan and barge upstairs to grab McCormick while they're distracted? We need to find out what the hell that was. As he inserted the battery into his phone, his eyes landed on Kate. She sat in silence, holding up her last victim's radio. Voices were starting to yell. Nick, get to the bloody radio! Nathaniel Pierce. You better tell me what the hell that explosion was, bellowed Nicholas Grant. It felt like it came from your floor. It did, came Pierce's wail. Ian's office is gone. The breath halted in Ewan's throat. Gone, Grant screamed. Yes, literally gone. I'm standing here right now. There's just a pile of black debris and walls splattered with fire. It's still burning now. Ewan looked around and found confused expressions that mirrored his own. It all sounded too good to be true. The AME computer? Destroyed, Pierce wailed, like a man who had just lost a family member. The rebels have won. All my technology, all the research I ever did on AME. It's gone, and the computer's in a billion pieces. Hold on, thought Ewan. Did we seriously just win? How the hell did we do that? What did McCormick do? Alex was pumping his fists in delight. Kate looked as confused as Ewan, but nonetheless she was smiling. Ewan's phone powered up and he started to dial. What about Ian? Grant's voice asked through the radio. He asked about the computer before he asked about Marshall. How revealing. His body's in there next to the desk. At least, I'm pretty sure it's him. And McCormick? Nowhere to be seen. Wait, said Alex. Why did he ask about McCormick? Why on earth would he be in Marshall's office? Ewan's brain had never been particularly fast when it came to academic subjects, but his strategic instincts operated like lightning. If McCormick had entered Marshall's office for the first time in his life, and the computer had suddenly been destroyed, there was only one logical explanation. The bomb had been with him all along. And if McCormick could no longer be found, despite being guarded well enough to have no chance of escape, there was only one logical explanation for that too. Lorraine answered the phone. Did she push the button? Came her tight, choking voice. One sentence alone was enough to reveal a level of distress. Yeah, Ewan answered. We all did. A yell, strong enough to rattle Ewan's eardrum, sounded in his earpiece. It was loud enough to catch the attention of Alex and Kate. Lorraine? Ewan asked. What just happened? Shannon had tuned herself out of the conversation. Listening to Lorraine's explanation had been traumatic enough the first time, and she already knew what had happened. Marshall was dead, his office and computer destroyed, and the AME project had been utterly annihilated just hours before it would have rendered her father invincible. And all it had cost them was the life of Joseph McCormick. Shannon hadn't had much longer to deal with the news than the strike team. Lorraine had finished her explanation about a minute before past, which left Shannon mourning McCormick while he was still alive. Just come home, Lorraine finished. The mission's over, and McCormick can't come with you. Get out while everyone's still distracted. Shannon could hear Ewan's voice shouting in the background, but Lorraine hung up without letting him finish. She turned to Shannon with a look on in her face that was nothing short of harrowing. The whole world's uglier now, Lorraine groaned. My father lost his shield, Shannon replied. He won't be invincible after all. It could have been uglier, I guess. But not much uglier, she thought. It'll be even tougher for Lorraine once she gets home and tells the others what she did. I couldn't stop Joey Shetland from killing himself, she wailed. I couldn't save Callum Turner when his insulin ran out. I couldn't cure Roy Wolf's stomach cancer. And now I helped McCormick engineer his own death. What kind of nurse? You can't save everyone, Lorraine. It was the only sentence that came to Shannon's mind, and she knew it wouldn't help. Lorraine rested her weary head in one hand and stared deep into Shannon's eyes. Tell me you can forgive me for what I did. Shannon raised her eyebrows in surprise. She knew that Lorraine wanted comfort, and that comfort from anyone would do. But forgiveness was a big word to use so soon. I can understand why you did it, she answered. But tell me you can forgive me. Shannon's mind wandered to the McCormick she had known and loved, who had taken her in and accepted her despite her background, and done more for her in 3 weeks than he ever could have known. She remembered his gentle humour, his quiet but unrelenting love. Her thoughts rested on the first night she had met him, when he had stood over her in the clinic and with his unforgettable warm smile. A smile that would never return to Spitfire's eyes. Shannon? I can understand why you did it, she repeated. When Oliver Roth had learned that his enemies had escaped, his main reaction was relief. The destruction of Marshall's office had wiped out any chance of organising Floor Z. The soldiers scouring for fictional explosives had not been told their orders had expired. The surviving insurgents were able to vanish without a trace, victorious but without their leader. Roth was just grateful to return to his room for the night. He staggered along his Floor A corridor. The last of his energy faded after an evening that had involved a fight in a burning experiment chamber, a rampage through the HPFC, escorting a high-profile prisoner through the darkness, and the violent death of Ian Marshall. And Roth knew that if it weren't for his boss's orders to hunt the rebels, he could have died in the blast too. He walked into his messy bedroom, dropped his helmet onto the floor, sauntered to his bedside and collapsed onto his covers with an ear against his pillow, half focusing his eyes towards his personal armory. Even in his own sanctuary, he was surrounded by instruments of death. When Oliver Roth looked back on his short life, he didn't see much that mattered. There were a couple of old schoolmates he had liked, but he had focused more on his bullying victims. There had been vague hobbies, but his biggest efforts went on his social media presence. There had been plenty of decent teachers, none of whom he had respected. Now every one of them, from the pleasant but useless to the unbothered and unaffected, had all ended up inside their nearest citadel. Some may even have died. Meanwhile, McCormick had achieved more in that whole bunch than that whole bunch in the 5 minutes they had spent alone. And somehow, McCormick's departure from Earth didn't feel like an extra underdog scalp. It felt like the whole world had lost a part of itself. The only man ever to have seen Oliver Roth's vulnerable side was dead, which was both a distress and a comfort. Without moving himself from his bed, he kicked off his boots as angrily as he could. It had been more than a year since he last went to bed before midnight, but he just wanted his brain to shut off for the night. The anger infesting his thoughts was unbearable, and it came from a perfect storm of 3 different sources. First, the fact that McCormick had seen through him. Roth never had placed his trust in another person. He had plenty of mates at school, but no real friends, and certainly no girlfriend who would expect him to open up. He was neither abused nor loved, and his apathy towards the human race was probably the biggest reason he'd been able to slip so easily into his job. The second reason for his anger had been the obvious one. He had failed the night in every conceivable way. He had let Ewan out of the experiment chamber instead of letting him burn. He had been moments too late to stop McCormick from revealing the code to Kate. But his biggest mistake had come from a rare moment of compassion, when he had offered McCormick his shirt back. It had covered up the scar which, in hindsight, must have been where someone had inserted the bomb. Without that shirt, Ian Marshall would have been smart enough to realise what was going on. Finally, and worst of all, he knew it was too late to change anything about himself. McCormick had tried in vain to bring him away from darkness, but he must have known that Oliver Roth could not be turned. His eyes would kill him the moment he became ineffective. Maybe 5 years earlier, a man like McCormick could have changed him. But even at the young age of 14, Roth had already made the decisions that would define the rest of his life. McCormick may have talked about lives being falsely predestined, but Oliver Gabriel Roth would have to remain the murderous assassin forever. Roth buried his face into the pillow and took a breath deep enough to rupture a weak man's lungs. Whichever way he looked, in his home life and in his work life, as an assassin and as a person, as a potential hero and as a certain villain, he was a failure. End of chapter 27. Ready for the final chapter?
I'm going to grab myself a cup of green tea. Just
Sure.
give me 5 minutes. Not 5 minutes, 2 minutes.
Okay. If anyone has any questions or any comments they want to write in the chat, you're welcome to do so. And yeah, Roth misses McCormick. Yeah, as much as Roth can miss a person, that is, yeah, we are talking about someone who is kind of apathetic to the fact that his parents are locked up in the Citadel. There's no suggestion that he misses them. No, I once knew a teacher who said the great thing about teaching is that you can change someone's life in a minute. And that's the thing I think of when I think about McCormick and Roth's discussion in that store cupboard, I think it was. But even though Roth is quite certain that, well, he's already made his decisions, he's the villain forever, in a way, McCormick did reach him. Oof. And one chapter left to go. It's a fairly short one as well, mercifully. There is also a preview of Acceleration in there, but the tone of it is so different to the last chapter in this that honestly I'm just going to leave it until we read Acceleration in the new year. I don't know how long a break you're going to want from this. Speaking of breaks, by the way, when I I think it was last month when I said that the reason that the third Underdogs book took me so long to start was because the ending to book 2 just felt so neat. And I remember saying, no, it's not spoiler anything. I'm not suggesting it's the life or death of anyone. It's just from a narrative perspective. Yeah, you know where it's going right now. It's a good ending, but it's certainly not a happy ending. But more than anything else, it felt like a neat ending. And that's why it took me so long to start book 3. And I didn't start book 3 until I met face-to-face with the publisher. And after in the run-up to the publication of book 1, and said, what would it take for a sequel to be accepted? And the guy's literal response was, I'll send it over. So having established that, yes, Tooth and Nail was going to happen, I drove home, and my first instinct was to start writing book 3 because I'd run out of excuses. Okay, anything to say before the final chapter? Okay, I shall start reading. Chapter 28. At 5 o'clock in the morning, on the first anniversary of Takeover Day, Ewan was alone in the basement. My family were murdered a year ago today. His new family at Spitfire's Rise all knew where he was, but they knew not to disturb him. Just like Lorraine, who had sealed herself in the clinic again, Ewan had found his own space and planned to keep it all morning. He sat on the concrete floor alone, with McCormick's envelope in his hand. For the 11th or 12th time, Ewan read the stone tablet in front of him and remembered a personal detail about each of the chiseled names. Underdogs Memorial Wall. There's in loving memory of those who fought and gave their lives in the Great British Rebellion. Sarah Best, Callum Turner, Joe Horn, Elaine Dean, Aryan Shirazi, Tamor Shirazi, Roseanne Tate, Miles Ashford, Chloe Newham, Tim Wolfe, Tim Carson, Roy Wolfe, Mike Ambrose, Beth Foster, Thomas's mum, David Riley, Val Riley, Sally Sharp, Svetlana Karpov, Ben Christie, Rachel Watts, Daniel Mopoulos, Charlie Coleman, Raj Singh, Joseph McCormick. 23 dead in the space of a year. It seemed almost bloodless compared to the wars of old, But of an army that had numbered 33, including Shannon, only 10 remained, the smallest army in world history. But they had won the night, that particular night at least. Against odds which should have been insurmountable, they had earned the right to stay in the war. Perhaps in a month or so they would feel proud. But that morning, Spitfire's rise had transformed into a dull, sad building without atmosphere or character. Their loss seemed bigger than one man. Kate and Thomas had seized the farm for themselves, to share long hugs and wallow in understandable misery. Even with Ewan and Alex's support, Kate still blamed herself for McCormick's death. Unfairly, of course, but logic and facts didn't matter in the face of guilt and heavy anxiety. Ewan now understood why McCormick had been so opposed to Kate being the one who pressed the button. It was a heavy burden for an anxiety sufferer to bear, and she would bear it for a long time. Alex had felt awful too, but his worries were different. Something about another gap in his memory, when he had apparently proved to Lorraine and Shannon that Spitfire's rise was safe. He had no recollection of the conversation, and the women were reluctant to give him any details. It was driving him crazy. Ewan decided the hours had dragged on long enough. It was time to open the envelope and read McCormick's letter. He had pushed the idea to the back of his mind for as long as he could, occupying his time by reading the names on the memorial wall again and again. The letter would be the last communication Ewan and McCormick would ever have, and the thought of their relationship ending terrified him. As long as he refused to open the envelope, there would always be something new from his mentor to look forward to. But he owed it to McCormick to read his dying words. Ignoring the letter would be worse than clapping his hands over his ears like an infant, and would silence the man's performance before his final curtain. And yep, no one knows the address of Spitfire's rise except for Ewan. In fact, yeah, I think, if I remember rightly, there were only 3 people who knew the location: Ewan, Raj, McCormick. Now it's just Ewan. Ewan held his breath and tore open the envelope. Jack had turned the generator back on after he realised nobody was going to bed, so there was more than enough light to read. The words were difficult to stomach. My dear friend Ewan, although I take no pleasure in writing this letter, if you're reading it I must be another casualty of this war, I'm happy for the opportunity to say some important things to you. It'll be difficult to put my collection of unordered thoughts onto paper, but I'll do my best. I know it's tragic to lose anyone from our family, but try to avoid wasting your days feeling sorry for me. I lived to a ripe old age by modern standards, and spent my years filled with joy. I lived to watch so many people grow into their best selves, and by the end of my life I became the only war leader in history to know every one of my soldiers personally. No matter how I met my death, whatever pain or despair I may have felt at the end, it cannot cancel out the wonderful years I've lived. I hope I found the opportunity to tell you this, but either way, you and the Oakenfold students were my finest work. I remember the state we found each other in on takeover day, the state we were all in that day, and I compare it to the fine young adults you have all become. The old Ewan West is dead, buried underneath the hero who took his place. So never let your troubled past get in the way of your self-belief. Never think that your diagnoses make you a lesser person or not good enough to be who you're meant to be. And never feel guilty about what the old Ewan West did to Polly. Regardless of what happened, regardless of how I've missed her and Barbara, I haven't cried for them in almost a year. I've been too busy watching you all with a proud smile. It won't surprise you that I'm naming you as my successor. I want you to be the soldier who leads Britain in the charge against Nicholas Grant. I know you'll lead the Underdogs well, in your own special style that I could never have imitated, and I know that our friends will follow you. It may be a big task, but it's a task with your name written all over it. And since I've spent most of this letter telling you what not to do, I'll spend some time giving you a little leadership advice. First, listen to people. If your soldiers feel valued, they'll support you forever. You don't have to let them control your decisions, but their thoughts are always worth listening to. Second, make sure you know your soldiers' strengths. Know the right person for the right job. And make sure they know their own strengths too. It's easy to forget them when times are difficult. Third, recognize that you will make mistakes. I made plenty. But the last person who never made a mistake never made anything. And finally, love your soldiers. Even if they're a pain in the arse, love them. We might actually win this war, Ewan. Grant may see it as impossible, and once in a while you'll be tempted to think so too, but it's not beyond us. And the reason is simple. We are the underdogs, and history has shown us that the one thing dictators have to fear is underdogs. They are the people who start revolutions, win civil wars, and show off the incredible strength hidden inside regular people. If you win this war, if this small, untrained militia of less than a dozen brings down Nicholas Grant, if a group of teenagers from a special school defeats an army of millions, It will prove the might of underdogs once and forever. We are Britain's last line of defence, outnumbered, outgunned, but not outwitted. We are the people who will bring civilization back, who history will remember for 1,000 years. We are the underdogs of Spitfire's rise. Do me proud, my boy. You don't need someone like me for this. With love, Dr. Joseph McCormick. P.S. The pain of missing someone is always worth it for the joy of having known them. Always. I had to compose myself while I was reading the do me proud, my boy, you don't need someone like me for this. That's the one line that kind of really gets me. And with that, McCormick's friendship with Ewan was over. But a part of him lived on in Ewan, clear and inextinguishable. That was something, at least. The last sentence. Do me proud, my boy, you don't need someone like me for this. With love, Dr. Joseph McCormick. P.S. The pain of missing someone is always worth it for the joy of having known them, always. Ewan felt a throbbing in the back of his head, his usual doubting reaction when someone told him they trusted him. McCormick's kind of trust could change anyone's life, but the inevitable question lingered in Ewan's mind. Am I worth it? He breathed to himself, unaware that he had spoken. The memorial wall did not answer him, and the words on the letter did not change. McCormick had said everything he was ever going to say, and the questions from then on would be Ewan's to answer. Worth what? Came a friend's wounded voice from the stairs. Ewan closed his eyes. Nothing, Shannon. She reached the basement, wandered over to the memorial wall, and sat down on the floor next to him. Ewan was surprised when she leaned against him and rested her head against his chin, but he accepted and placed an arm around her shoulder. Ewan lay his letter on the ground, face down. I know you're not okay, said Shannon, so I won't ask. Just remember that you're not alone. What did yours say? Shannon seemed surprised at the bluntness of his question, or maybe the fact he had even asked. The letters had been private after all. But Ewan's prediction was right. Shannon didn't mind sharing. He told me he was proud of me, she said, and how great it was that I chose the good of humanity instead of a life of luxury with my dad. He told me I was just what the team needed, the right balance of fiery determination and lucid self-control, if I got his words right. Ewan smiled, fighting back tears. It sounded enough like McCormick. He also said I'll need to prepare myself for New London, Shannon continued. I can't go on forever just doing missions in the countryside. Before this war ends, I'll have to go back and face him. She lifted her head from Ewan so she could turn and face him. And he told me to look after you, she finished. When times get tough, you'll need the support of your girlfriend. McCormick worked it out, he thought. He knew what was going on between us. Hell, he probably worked it out before we did. So what about you? She asked. What did he say? Ewan looked at the face down paper and decided to tell her. She had trusted him, so it was only right to trust her back. She had earned it. He wants me to lead the war against your father. Ewan did not know what reaction to expect, but Shannon smiled. He gave me a bunch of leadership advice, he continued. Last double page. Then told me not to worry because the others will follow me. I don't know what to make of that. I think you are worth it, said Shannon. Whether or not you realise it, the others look up to you. Ewan looked to her, blatant doubt in his eyes. You're usually the only one in the battlefield who knows what's going on, she continued. The one who keeps fighting when others lose motivation. Someone with a chaotic background who can think straight anyway. The guy who fights tooth and nail so naturally because he's been doing it his whole life. It's enough to inspire anyone. Ewan started to laugh. Shut your mouth and listen, said Shannon. Since I first met you, you've been to the inner city and got out alive. You've gone to Oakenfold and escaped. Last night you got up to floor C without dying. I know you don't realise, but the others are amazed by all that. If you talk to them, they'll listen. If you lead, they'll follow. Ewan decided not to tell Shannon she was wrong. McCormick himself had advised him to listen to his soldiers. And incredibly, she changed his mind. I guess there's only one way to find out, he said. Shannon smiled and rested her head against him once more. They gazed at the memorial wall together, their eyes fixed on the lowest name. McCormick had passed the baton, and Ewan would pick it up and run. And with the underdogs ripped apart by grief, the sooner he started, the better. The more he thought about it, the more Ewan realised he was up to the challenge. He had spent the first 16 years of his life around people who had forced an identity on him, who had made him believe he was nothing more than a nasty kid with special needs and a boatload of personal issues. But now, with him at the helm of the underdogs, it would be his turn to tell the world who he was. It was time for Ewan West to take centre stage, for him to speak, for the world to listen, and for his friends to win the war. End of book 2. Right.
Heavy,
Yeah.
very heavy. Uh,
And if you're wondering, that is one of the reasons why I decided that the McCormick wasn't going to make it to the end, because at some point this needed to become Ewan's series. It was his turn to become everything that he deserves to be. So yeah, now Ewan's the leader of the Underdogs. There's 10 of them left,
that's the
and
concept I love about Underdogs, though.
hmm,
Having, neurodivergent folks as the heart of, the
hmm,
rebellion and proving, it's always kind of like, I don't know how to phrase it, but it's always like when there is a fictional story written about, you know, neurodivergent people, it's always related to sympathy or,
yeah,
something along those lines. And never, ever have I read anything that's, put actual neurodivergence in the lines, in the light of how it works in real life. Am I making sense?
yeah, you are. And I think representation is enormously important. And one of the things that I tell people about the experience of writing the series is that I got tired and bored of autistic characters being in works of fiction, but it's like side characters or people who need saving and so on. I wanted um, neurodivergent characters to be the front and center heroes, so I wrote it 4 times.
I love that. Could you repeat that? I want to like have it written there.
Okay,
Underdogs,
sure. Oh,
author's
I'm
vision.
so sorry, Steph, and I also don't blame you. I've I just realised that there aren't many people who I've witnessed personally reading or being read the last chapter, and I think the only other three that have done were 2 students who I used to work with, and a then 11-year-old lad who, yeah, th- he was sad, but they these aren't people who necessarily develop really really close connections to characters. So yeah, this has not been guilt free for me, by the way. This talk, because I've known all year what has been coming in the final few chapters. There. Sorry, did you want me to repeat that?
There's, I don't know if I phrased it correctly. Do you see it on your screen?
No, I just see Steph's gone to my screen. Here we go.
Okay.
Because visions that have autistic and to be front and center heroes is what I said specifically.
Winter Heroes. Okay. I love that because
Thank you.
it's like it's a very long discussion and we could probably have a live session on that, but
Mm, yeah.
the stigma associated and the understanding of autism and really any other type of neurodivergence is still very pathological,
Oh yeah.
and it's a
Where's all the
traumatic.
moral panic about dyslexia? Like, oh, there's too many dyslexic people these days, and
Like they call it the epidemic. It's, oh, but anyway,
mm,
what like this is what I love about this. Like it highlights neurodivergence. It explains some of the very real challenges as well. But
mm,
at the same time, it reflects the positives of what being neurodivergent really means.
mm,
And I love that it's, kind of like balancing the both sides because it's not all positive, but it's not all tragic. It's not
mm.
tragic, it's human. And so I love
I've,
that. And I also love that you just didn't focus on just autism
mm,
or just ADHD. You brought in
thanks.
a variety of
Mm,
neurodivergent traits.
mm,
And I absolutely love that. I
mm,
hate you for killing off McCormick. I absolutely detest you for that. Um, but when I say that, please take it as a compliment. Um,
Yeah, thank you. I've heard of people throwing their books at the wall before. And by the way, if I can say a British swear word, my partner's nickname for me after that was Murderous Wanker.
I have no idea what that means, but
Good. Don't
I,
Google it.
I do know what
Please don't.
murderers mean.
Oh, yeah, that's it. It's basically a
Yeah.
British swear word, which,
Okay.
yeah, is one step up from Mutton Mustard, I'll tell you that. Because
Uh,
she loved McCormick much as anyone does. I did.
I mean, I
I know
don't
from
think
those
there's any person
met
out there
my.
who didn't like
Sorry?
McCormick.
Pardon?
I don't think there's anyone out there who didn't like absolutely love McCormick.
Yeah, that's the thing. I wrote him as too much of a likable character. I knew from literally the first day of planning the series, um, main leader, also a beloved father figure. He needs to he needs to not make it past the first half of the series. So yeah, literally from day one, when I set up my first spreadsheet of characters, um, yeah, but
I
then I ended up.
remember when we
Sorry.
first started the book reading session of Underdogs, and we were having a discussion on each of the characters, like my favorites, your favorites, Amon's favorites, and like discussing the characteristics. And we were going kind of like, we were asking you questions about how did that character come into being. And you told us that McCormick was most closely um, kind of like inspired, not inspired, but like, it's kind of like you, you looked at McCormick like your fictional version, if that makes sense.
What I said, or presumably said, was McCormick was the man I wanted to be in 40 years' time. Now 30 years'
Something
time.
like that. Yeah.
Actually, wait, no, 25 years' time. Oh, bloody hell. But
So
yeah,
this would have been
at the
hard for
time,
you to write.
yeah, except he's neurotypical. So, but in terms of his attitudes and his attributes and his compassion first approach, that was the kind of thing that I wanted to be at the age of 64.
He was a neurodiversity affirming neurotypical
Yeah.
person, and that makes all the difference.
Curiously enough, he is one of those rare people with no official experience of
Yeah.
neurodiversity. He was a maths lecturer. He would have inevitably had autistic students, and so a bunch of the people that he and Barbara like raised through growing up. Uh, um, oh yeah, you know how each of the about half the underdogs have their own short story that I wrote kind of as a side project. You
Yeah.
get to meet one of McCormick's mentees in McCormick's short story, and so he is blatantly, obviously neurodivergent, but McCormick never knew, Barbara never knew. So what you've ended up with is McCormick, who is leading a group that was about 50% made up of Oakenfold students, but he just can naturally accommodate them because of some unrecognized experience, and B, just the person he is. It's like when my mum met my stepdaughter for the first time. She doesn't have much in the way of face-to-face experience with people with moderate learning difficulties. As the Actually, no, her diagnosis severe autism, but either way, I'm not aware of mum having met a child like her before, but she just naturally was exactly who she needed. And so some people, yeah, mum's completely neurotypical, by the way. And some people are just like, they're just naturally accommodating because it's who they are. And maybe part of it is listening first and talking later, which McCormick, to be fair, does like talking. He's literally a lecturer. But,
No, but
but
here's the thing.
he
What
does listen.
McCormick does is what I've noticed. Like I didn't read the whole, you know, tooth and nail, but like whatever I've read about McCormick so far is that he realizes the neurodivergence of all these people, but he doesn't attempt to change it through his talks
Mm,
or discussions. He kind of like gives them a way to navigate their life
mm,
while keeping in mind what their strengths are, what their challenges are, and then strategically placing them in roles that that really help them thrive. And so that's the very definition of being, neurodiversity farming. So even if he talks, I would love a person who talks to me like that.
Hopefully, towards me in 25 years' time. I'll still be autistic, but still.
Hey, we love our brains, right?
Well, the lucky ones of us do. People like
Yes.
you, and I'm not sure whether he loves his brain yet. So I'm not sure he ever has. But McCormick did help in that, at least in some way.
Well, let's hope we can all have a little McCormick in
Yeah.
us, part of him. But anyway, that has come to an end.
Yeah.
The next book, I think, is Acceleration.
Yes.
Yes. Are we going to start that next year, Chris?
Next year, yes.
Next year.
Yeah. So I won't make it wait until 2026. Even though it did
Yeah.
take me years between writing that chapter and the first chapter of book
And the rest.
3, you won't have to wait that long.
We're going to jump right to it in the next year. Do you have any updates to share before we leave?
Not really. I'll just carry on working on the new novel, very, very, very slowly making progress. And yeah, we've got one more day of work before just kind of taking a few weeks off.
I have also decided that after this week, I'm going to take at least a week and a half completely free.
Yeah.
Or maybe the last whole of December, just to kind of like let everything sink in and process and just enjoy with the family. But I have a couple of updates for Kind Theory. And we have an event coming up on February 22nd, Collaborative Inclusion. And keep an eye out on our social media just to see updates about that event. It's free of cost. You can register, attend. You can join virtually as well if you want to. It's a hybrid sort of a model. We have partnered with some amazing people. Kind Theory is, where it is right now because of our partners and people who we collaborate with, like my friend Chris. And I'm hoping, and this is an open prayer, the first time we met Chris and we did the first session, I prayed for the same thing. I'm still praying for that one day we'll have enough funding to bring Chris over here in Texas and do this live and probably maybe even hold a creative writing workshop. That's kind of like my goal. But I don't know how long it would take. But hey, a girl can try, right? We have a small but mighty team, and we're going to keep trying for that. I'm not going to keep Chris for longer because he has a family to tend to.
And dinner has been probably overcooking for the last 10, 15 minutes. I told them we'd be definitely finished by 7:30, except I think the emotions kind of got to us.
Yes, I am so sorry. Please do offer my apologies. Go eat something, enjoy, and thank you so much for doing this. And we'll launch the schedule for Acceleration soon. Take care.
Cool. All right.
Bye-bye.